Chemical tests for acetate. Acetate is a negative ion or an anion with chemical formula CH3COO-. The neutral molecules formed by the combination of the acetate ion and a cation are commonly called acetates. The most well-known compound containing the acetate ion is acetic acid. Other examples of acetate salts are sodium acetate and potassium acetate. Our aim here is to test for the presence of acetate ion in a given salt. The tests to determine the presence of acetate ion are preliminary tests and confirmatory tests. Let's look at the preliminary tests of acetate. They are physical examination of the salt, dry heating test, concentrated sulfuric acid test. Physical examination of the salt. Materials required: a small quantity of the salt in a watch glass, distilled water and glass rod. Procedure: take a pinch of the salt in a watch glass. To this, add a few drops of distilled water. Now, take the glass rod and rub the salt with it and smell it. A vinegar-like smell indicates the presence of acetate. Dry heating test. Materials required: original salt, blue litmus paper, test tube holder and Bunsen burner. Procedure: take a small quantity of the salt in the test tube and heat it over the Bunsen burner. On heating, acetate undergoes decomposition to evolve vapors of acetic acid. Place a moist blue litmus paper over the mouth of the test tube. Acetic acid turns the blue litmus paper red. Concentrated sulfuric acid test. Materials required: original salt, concentrated sulfuric acid, blue litmus paper, test tube and a dropper. Procedure: take a small amount of the salt in the test tube. To this, add a small volume of concentrated sulfuric acid using the dropper. Acetate reacts with concentrated sulfuric acid to produce vapors of acetic acid with characteristic vinegar-like smell. Place a blue litmus paper over the mouth of the test tube. Acetic acid turns the blue litmus paper red. Next, we look at the confirmatory tests of acetate. They are oxalic acid test, ester test, ferric chloride test. Oxalic acid test. Materials required: original salt, solid oxalic acid, distilled water, glass rod, watch glass and a spatula. Procedure: take a small quantity of the salt in a watch glass. Using the spatula, put a small quantity of solid oxalic acid into the salt. Now, add a few drops of distilled water into the mixture so as to get a paste. Take the glass rod and rub the paste with it and smell it. Oxalic acid reacts with acetate salt to form acetic acid, which produces a characteristic vinegar-like smell. Ester test. Materials required: original salt, concentrated sulfuric acid, ethyl alcohol, distilled water, test tube holder, glass rod, droppers and Bunsen burner. Procedure: take a small quantity of the salt in the test tube. To this, add a small volume of concentrated sulfuric acid using a dropper. Heat the contents of the test tube over the Bunsen burner. Now, add a small volume of ethyl alcohol using another dropper. Shake the test tube well. Pour the contents of the test tube in the beaker containing distilled water. Stir the contents of the beaker using a glass rod. Smell the contents of the beaker by wafting. Acetate salts react with concentrated sulfuric acid and ethyl alcohol to form the ester ethyl acetate, which has a fruity smell. Ferric chloride test. Materials required: aqueous solution of the salt, neutral ferric chloride solution, dilute hydrochloric acid, distilled water, test tubes, test tube holder, droppers, funnel, filter paper and Bunsen burner. Procedure: take a small amount of aqueous solution of the salt in a test tube. To this, add a small quantity of neutral ferric chloride solution using a dropper. Acetate reacts with neutral ferric chloride to form reddish-brown colored ferric acetate. Now, using the funnel and the filter paper, filter the reddish-brown colored ferric acetate into another test tube. A reddish-colored filtrate is obtained. Take 1 part of the filtrate in a test tube. To this, add dilute hydrochloric acid using a dropper. We can see that the reddish color disappears. Take the second part of the filtrate and add distilled water to it. Now, boil the contents of the test tube over the Bunsen burner. Ferric acetate reacts with water to form a reddish-brown precipitate of iron complex. Precautions: handle the apparatus and chemicals carefully. Use droppers to take the reagents